Welcome to CASA Parenting, Week 6, Everything Teen. This week will be broken up into several different parts. We're hoping to get it into 2 parts, but if not, it will be 3 parts since it is a lengthy session. My name is Joylyn Allard. I am the therapist here at CASA, and I am joined today by Leslie Minton, our children's program manager, and my intern, Katie. The course expectations are the same as usual. Please silence your phones, only answer in an emergency. Make sure that social media and other fun activities and games on your phone are not posing a distraction to yourself or others if you happen to be participating with multiple people. Also participate in conversations and ask questions when you feel comfortable doing so, and be kind and respect the instructors and other participants, as well as your right and others' rights for privacy and confidentiality. Keep in mind your boundaries and what you're willing to share about yourself, and don't share information or names of other participants to people outside of the group. And do not share group materials with others. Do not give them the link to the classroom. Don't give them the materials, the PowerPoints, the videos, anything. If you know others that are interested in the course, please refer them to us instead. And keep track of your own certificates. We do not keep copies of them. This is especially important if you're required to take the course and you have to prove that you've taken it. We only keep track of attendance and whether or not you received a certificate due to your participation level. We do not keep actual copies of the certificates themselves. That is your responsibility as a participant. In Week 6, Everything Teen, our learning objectives are to learn about the development in the teenage years, about potential behavioral issues, what puberty is, and how to talk to our children about puberty and sex, learn how to safely monitor our teenagers through dating, social media, their language, and also their other roles within adolescence. Learn to identify the signs of a child being bullied or if they are being a bully, and learn to identify potential signs and symptoms of adolescent drug or alcohol use. So, first and foremost, are you ready to raise a teenager? Make sure you're getting information, reading articles and books, and just educating yourself on what that looks like. Think back to your own teen years. Remember your struggles with acne, embarrassment, whether you developed early or late, and expect some mood changes in your typically sunny child, and be prepared for conflict as they mature into their own individual. And also, parents who know what's coming can better and more effectively cope with the changes that they're going to experience with their child during these years. So the more you know, the better you can be prepared. And talking to your kids early and often, starting talks about menstruation or wet dreams after they've already begun having those issues is too late to have those conversations. Answer questions early, but don't overload them with information, and make sure that it's age-appropriate content, which we'll talk about later on in the PowerPoint. Put yourself in the child's place, have empathy. We've been there, we've done that, we know what it feels like, and it's a very highly stressful part of life, and everything's changing around you. And they're also concerned and self-conscious. Set your expectations. Teens might act unhappy about the expectations that you place on them, but it's still important to understand that they need to know that their parents care enough about them to expect certain things from them, such as good grades and acceptable behavior, and sticking to those rules and being consistent. If parents have appropriate expectations, teens will likely try to meet them, but without reasonable expectations that are manageable and not unreasonable, the teen may feel like you don't care about them or her if you don't have reasonable expectations. Inform your teen and stay informed yourself. Through the teen years, there's going to be a lot of experimentation, and sometimes that experimentation includes engaging in risky behaviors. Don't avoid the subjects of sex and drugs or alcohol and tobacco use just because you don't want to talk to them about that or give them ideas. Discussing these hard topics openly with your kids before they're exposed to them actually sometimes makes it more likely that they'll act responsibly when the time comes. And share your family values with your teen and talk about what you believe is right and wrong and why you believe that. Also know the warning signs. A certain amount of change is normal during the teen years, but anything that's too drastic or long-lasting, such as a switch in personality or behaviors, may signal real trouble. The kind that needs professional help. So watching for some warning signs like extreme weight gain or loss, sleep problems, rapid or drastic changes in personality, sudden change in friends, skipping school often, failing grades, talk or even jokes about suicide, signs of tobacco, alcohol, or drug use, which we talk about a lot later, run-ins with the law, and any other inappropriate behavior that lasts more than 6 weeks can be a sign of underlying trouble. And may need help from a doctor, counselor, or any other mental health professional. Also, respect your child's privacy. Some parents, understandably, have a hard time with this one because they want to be in their child's business. They want to know what they're doing, when they're doing it, and with who, but in an overbearing way. But to help your child become a young adult, they'll need some privacy. If you notice warning signs of trouble, such as the ones we talk about later, and the ones we just talked about, then you can invade your child's privacy until you get to the heart of the problem, but otherwise it's a good idea to kind of back off. In other words, reading all of your child's texts, going through the rooms, reading their emails, monitoring their phone calls, can be troublesome with your relationship with them if it's overdone and you have no reason for doing it. Of course, for other safety reasons, you also should expect your teen to share. You shouldn't expect your teen to share all of their thoughts or activities with you all the time. Of course, for safety reasons, you should always know where your teen is going and when they'll be returning, what they're doing, and with whom. But you don't need to know every single detail of what's going to be going on. And you definitely shouldn't expect to be invited to come along. Teenagers will be better off if they know that you trust them. And that they have your trust until you have a reason not to trust them, that the trust has been broken. Monitor what your child reads and sees, so making sure they have age-appropriate access to TV shows, magazines, books, the internet, etc. Setting appropriate rules for them. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Show them that you care. Also self-explanatory. Having reasonable expectations and rules. Avoid ultimatums. Be clear and concise. Explain why you have those reasons. Be flexible. And then build trust with them. And also encourage good self-care. So here are some videos on how to be a good parent to a teenager. They are both by the same person, and they're roughly about 15 minutes long. I'm not going to play the entire videos, so if you want to continue watching them, you can in the video playlist in Google Classrooms. It's right there as a material in week 6.
Hi, welcome to Hero TV. I'm Dr. Paul Jenkins. Today we're talking about parenting, and specifically parenting with teens, which can be kind of a challenge sometime. I'm going to share a few short tips with you in this video that will help you to be a good parent to your teenager. Parenting. That's one of the greatest challenges probably in the entire history of the planet. And there are some challenges that sometimes come up as we're parenting, especially with teens. I think before we get into the real content of this video, I really want to establish the importance of our job as parents. Now, when I ask parents here in my office, what is your job? I get some really great answers like, it's my job to teach them correct principles. It's my job to steer them or guide them in a way that they can become productive citizens or to have healthy, happy, fulfilling lives. All great answers. I think they can all be summarized into this one concept, and we'll come back to this. Your job as a parent is to love them, no matter what, and even if. Now, sometimes we have to play the little game, the even if game. So will I love my kids even if they flunk out of school? Okay, that one's pretty easy. Will I love them even if they disobey me? You've tried that, okay? Will I love them even if they break the law? They're arrested, they're incarcerated, they hurt or injure each other, they get strung out on drugs, they go to rehab. Ask all the questions and get really solid on that. Your job is to love them, no matter what and even if. Now, we get deceived sometimes as parents, thinking our job is to make sure that they something. Now, if you've already got teenagers, and you probably do if you found this video, that probably means that you've already encountered this. Can you make sure that they anything? Can you make sure that they pass their classes? Can you make sure that they're respectful? Can you make sure that they obey? No, I don't think that that's even possible. So let's get it out of our mind that our job is to make sure that they anything. And get right back to our job is to love them no matter what and even if. If you'll stay attached to that particular job, I can share with you some ideas that I think are going to be really helpful. So keep that in mind as we get into this. Now, whenever we're talking about parenting, whether it's teens or younger kids, I like to start with this graph where we will plot control on this side against maturity down here. Now, control means control over your own life. Control goes from 0 to 100%. So you can have all the control and none of the control or somewhere in between. Now, maturity gets kind of fun to talk about. Typically, when we're talking about maturity, we're talking about how grown up you are. So if we start this graph down here with birth, think about it. How much control do you have over your own life at birth? Right. Hardly any. You can make a big noise and a big stink, but that's about it. So as you increase in maturity, let's put adult over here at this end. Although we all know adults who aren't very mature. We'll come back to that in just a minute. As an adult, how much control do you have over your own life? Now, if I were to ask your teenager that, what would they say? All the control. See, they've got this perception that adults have all of the control. So let's go with what they say for now. Now, as adults, you and I know that there's some small print, but we're not talking about that right now. So between birth and adulthood, we have this line that goes like this. Now what this means is that you have more and more control the more and more mature you become in your life. Does that make sense to you? So under the line is the part of the control you get for yourself. Over the line is the part of the control that others take. And there has to be 100% control. The only question is who's going to take it. And there's a lineup, by the way. Let me throw that in real quick. The lineup for the control, it goes first, self. That means you get first crack at the control. This is true for your kids too, no matter what their age is. Second in line is the parents. So if your kids are not in control of themselves, it becomes your responsibility. And it is in your control to take that control next. Who's after parents? Some people say friends or society or the school or whatever. It's the state. The state has the power and the authority to take control over you or over your children. Now, whether that's right or wrong, we're not here to discuss. But they're third in line. That's why it is so important for kids to gain control of themselves. And if they can't do it, I want parents to be next in line. Because it's awfully unfortunate when we have to defer that to the state. So let's go back to how maturity stacks up when we take age out of the equation. So I'm erasing the birth and adult indicators here, and we instead are going to break this into 3 chunks or stages. I'm going to call these stages. Stage 1, Stage 2, and Stage 3. So let's talk about what each of those stages looks like, and then we'll apply that to how we can become better parents for our teenagers. At Stage 1, you'll notice this is the least mature of the 3 stages. The self doesn't get very much control. Others take most of the control, and for you as parents, that's very important. In Stage 1, this is characterized by being very immature. So what do we mean when we say immature? Selfish. Let's use that word. Selfish and self-centered. At Stage 1, you're fighting to get what you want. At Stage 1, there are tantrums and fits and yelling and screaming and crying and whining. You get the picture, right? Notice as we're talking about the stages, it's about stage, not age. So anyone of any age could throw a temper tantrum. We expect it from a 2-year-old, not so much from our 17-year-old. And when an older kid or a teenager is acting in this selfish fighting stage, we describe them as being immature. So you wouldn't necessarily say that about a 2-year-old because it's age typical and age appropriate. But those temper tantrums become a real problem for these older kids. So the demanding, the whining, the nagging, all of that stuff's on Stage 1. Okay? Now let's move to Stage 2. When you move to Stage 2, you stop fighting and you start cooperating. I'm going to put cooperation in here. At Stage 2, you don't want any trouble. You want to keep the peace. So you will negotiate. You will try to work for some kind of a win-win solution. See, Stage 2 is really more of a compliant and cooperative kind of a stage. And the cooperation is what delineates the difference between Stage 1 and Stage 2. Now for Stage 3, that is the most mature of all 3 stages. This is where we would call this true responsibility. At Stage 3, you're doing the right things for the right reasons. Another word that I really like here is initiative, where you see what needs to be done and you take care of it. So a quick test to just see how this plays out in a family. Let's say that your 13, 14, 15-year-old child is the one that we're talking about. And we approach that child and we say, Nate, would you please take out the garbage? And Nate, as a 15-year-old, of course, is going to answer, trick question. It depends on what stage he's on. Let's say that he's on Stage 1. What would his answer be? Take out the garbage? Why do I have to do that? Nobody else ever has to do anything around here. Why is it me? I'm just your slave, isn't it? I'm out of here. Okay, and so it can get really colorful. Or stage 1 could be a little more subtle. Something like, whatever. I don't even know what that means for sure. But he's out the back door, right? He's not taking out the garbage. Do you see? You recognize it. Stage 1 is where they will not cooperate. They're selfish. They're fighting you on everything. Okay, got it? Now let's bring Nate up to stage 2. Nate, would you please take out the garbage? Now at stage 2, Nate's response might still not be enthusiastic. It might be something like, fine. But then he does it. See, the key here is cooperation, even if it's not being thrilled about it. Stage 2 might be a little more on the pleasant side. It could be something like, okay, yeah, sure. Or he might try to work out some kind of an agreement with you. Something like, well, I'll do it, but can I finish this show first? Can I finish this game? I still need to save, right? Save. I never quite understood that. What are they going to do? Have to play it again sometime? Anyway, stage 2 is the cooperation stage. Okay, got it? Let's move to stage 3. Nate, would you please take out the garbage? Okay, now on stage 3, of course he's going to be happy to do it. He will be cheerful, he will comply, he'll say, yes, I'd be happy to help. But an even better stage 3 response, oh, Dad, I already took out the garbage. But is there anything else I could do to help you out? Meanwhile, Dad's out cold on the floor, right? Kids of any age can do this. But the stage 3 response includes initiative, because you don't even have to ask them. They see what needs to be done, and they do it. I had a 13-year-old girl in my office not too long ago with her mom, and they're having some grand adventures. And I wanted to see if she really got this, and so I asked her, how does Mom know? And she's like, how does she know what? How does Mom know that the dishes need to be done? How can she tell? And this 13-year-old girl, she rolled her eyes a little bit at me, kind of like, oh, Dr. Ball. She can see it. Oh, really? Can you see it? And this is where it started to click in with her a little bit. Okay, I get it. See, she can see that the dishes need to be done, but she's not taking enough maturity to actually step up and do that. So, when we understand the 3 stages, then we can understand how we intervene or how we handle our teenagers. We can't expect them to be stage 3 if they're showing us stage 1 behavior. So real quick on what the parent's job is at each of these stages. Identify what it is, and you can tell where your kids are. For stage 1, we apply consequences. It's the only thing that works on stage 1. Stage 1 is driven by consequences because everything is external in terms of why they're doing their moral reasoning. It's all based on what's in it for me, or am I going to get clobbered for this? See, it's very externalized. So we use consequences at stage 1. We still use consequences at stage 2, but we also add communication. I'll give you 3 C words, okay? Consequences is the first one. Communication is next. Now we'll still use consequences, but there's a different kind of consequences we use at stage 2, and it has to do with that, with the cooperation. You'll notice that some consequences require cooperation and others don't. If you're on stage 1, you have to pick consequences that do not require cooperation because you don't get it until stage 2. Now you can add all kinds of new consequences at stage 2 that require cooperation. That's kind of fun. And you add the communication piece. Now when you move to stage 3, when your child's on stage 3, here's the last C word. Consultation. This is where your kid comes to you. Your teenager knocks on your door and says, Dad, what can I do about this? You know, he's got some kind of problem. Or, Mom, what do you think about this thing that I'm dealing with? And you share your paternal wisdom with them, and they very graciously thank you as they return home to their own 5 kids, right? Well, this can happen before they actually reach full maturity. Teenagers who figure this out find out very quickly that they get to have a whole lot more control in their life. And you think about it, if your teenager is showing you stage 3 behavior consistently, you want to back off and give them as much control as possible over their own life. And I found that kids pick up on this really quickly as well. So to become a better parent to your teenager, number one, your job is to love them, no matter what and even if. Stay very clear about that. And then in the context of love, we determine what stage our kids are on in terms of their moral development.
Whoops.
And then in the context of love, we determine what stage our kids are on in terms of their moral development, and then we know what to do to respond, either through consequences, effective communication, or simply consulting with them.
Well, thanks for watching Hero TV.
You know we've got a lot of parenting resources, no exception today. We're getting clear on the teenagers, how to be a better parent to your teenager. We get a lot of comments in our YouTube videos about specifics, like, well, how do I apply this to my teenager?
Yeah.
So we're diving into that here today. I think the most important thing to start with is understanding that a teenager is a different animal. Animal, okay, I know. I'm going to be accused of being insensitive now. It's a whole different thing from a child. In fact, there was somebody came into the office not too long ago who said, he's doing this and he's doing that and he's doing this. This is just not like my child. And I responded, it's not your child.
It's not your child, it's your teenager.
Different animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so understanding those developmental differences is really important.
Yeah. So, one of the things, we've talked about how a toddler is quite self-centered. They want what they want it right now, and they really can't see how other people's needs fit in. And it's kind of interesting because they sort of grow out of that as they learn how to make friends and take on perspective of other people. It's kind of interesting. There's a little return to that sort of an attitude in the teenage years. Now, they're able to see it and come in and out of it sometimes, but there's a bit of a return to that.
Well, they've got the intellectual capacity now to understand things like they couldn't when they were just little toddlers. But you're right, Vicki, there are some repeats.
Yeah.
I want to do it myself.
Yeah.
You hear from your 2-year-old.
And from your teenager.
And from your 15-year-old, right? So you're going to see kind of a return to those developmental stages. But they also have the intellectual capacity now. They have a greater understanding of what's going on in the world out around them. For little kids, their world is confined to these 4 walls.
Right.
Everything I know is right here in my home. And so parents have a little more ability to structure that. Whereas teenagers have an understanding of what's going on in the world out there. I just had an 11-year-old in my office yesterday who was experiencing some things that used to be confined to 17, 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
Because of the internet and because of the technology that's available. They get exposed to things a lot more. So keep that in mind as you work with your teen, that there are going to be some developmental differences and some similarities too. We get to learn a lot from that.
Yeah. And we're gonna refer back to our stage time, because a lot of the times we remember it's about stage, not age. And I guess I've mentioned this whole returning because sometimes you return to stage 1, and that's going to make a difference about the way that you respond to your teenager. Instead of just getting mad at them for not being who they were yesterday or
Right.
behaving the way they did 2 weeks ago, go ahead and meet them where they're at. So if you need a refresher, go back and find that video about the stages of moral development and just
Yes.
keep that in mind.
It's called Teaching Kids Responsibility.
Right.
All about positive parenting. You'll find it here in the positive parenting playlist. That's important to review those stages
Right.
so that we understand what is it that we're dealing with right now. I'm expecting my child, now my teenager, to behave in a certain way, but they're giving me something else. Well, what stage is that on? Here's one of the big things that changes, Vicki. When we get into the teenage years, we lose some control.
Yeah, a lot.
Because your child, as they mature, they will take more control. Whether you want to share it with them or not, eventually they're going to take it.
And whether you think they're ready for it or not, they're taking it.
Now this is huge. I remember a mom and a son sitting on my couch over there, and I asked her, what's the problem? Well, she went into a long explanation of how school was going downhill, and he was hanging out with questionable people and trying substances and, just having all kinds of issues going on. Well, he's sitting over on the other end of the couch. He's got his hat on backwards. He's chewing on a toothpick, and he's just kind of got an attitude about being there. Well, I asked him, what's going on? He turns to her in this angry way and says, she is controlling my life! I look at her like, what's up, Mom? You're controlling his life? She's like, no, I can't. That's the problem. She doesn't have that control. I think we got to get clear about what we control and what we don't. One thing you might try with your teenager especially, just split your paper in half. Okay, just get a piece of paper, draw a line right down the middle. Put your name at the top of one side and your teenager's name at the top of the other, and then start listing the things that each of those parties controls about the teenager's life. And you're going to find very quickly that they control most of the stuff that you're worried about. How they handle school, how they handle friends, how they handle substances, whatever it is, right? Their language, their behavior, their attitude. It's all on their side of the page. What's on your side of the page? Well, there's some important stuff there. But as it relates to your teen, it really comes back to what do I, as a parent, provide? And you provide access, you provide permission, you provide services, you provide goods. Right?
Right.
Those are the things you control. So, especially with parenting teens, it's important to acknowledge that control.
And I think you really have to, when working with teens, you have to realize one of the things that irritates us the most of parents of teens is the teen's attitude. And we don't control that. And I think that's one of the things that frustrates us so much. We get really upset that we can't control their attitude, that we can't affect their attitude the way that we want to.
And then our attitude goes out the window.
And so you got to get really clear about that. So the things you can control, put in the structure and everything that you need to control that. And then you've got to learn a way to let some of the things you don't like, their attitude, off.
Yes, or to set up some kind of an economic transaction.
Right.
If you do the split page exercise, you can always look at, okay, what is it on my teenager's side of the page that I really am concerned about right now? It might be school. You don't control that, they do. But you've got stuff on your side. So you set up a transaction where, hey, and it's pleasant, okay, keep a pleasant voice and faith. Hey, I don't want to nag you about that. That's not fair to you or me. Here's what I'm willing to do. If you will control this thing in a way that I like, I will control this thing in a way that you like. Deal? And as long as you're smiling, see, when mom's smiling, kids are thinking. Good rule of thumb.
Right.
As your teens get older and you start to experience less control, that tips parents over sometimes and they get really frantic. I think it's important to go back to a really positive interaction with that teen and find a way to enjoy them.
Yeah. This can be so tricky, but you try to start seeing them for the new individual that they are. Somebody you're just meeting maybe, and be willing to look for some qualities and some characteristics, some humor, different things that you really like about your teen.
This carries some power when you're working with teens because they will respond much more favorably to someone who likes them and enjoys them than they will to someone that they know doesn't approve of their behavior or their lifestyle or their actions or whatever. So you want to put yourself in that position intentionally, that you enjoy them and do it genuinely. Come from
Yeah.
the best place in your heart.
And really take the opportunity to look at this new teenager, this new person in your life, and find things you like about them. Because there are going to be things. Now, they'll be different than maybe what it was as a school-age child, you know.
Probably. Yeah.
But be willing to find them.
I love that, Vicki. And having a sense of wonder, fascination, engagement, this changes the dynamic and puts you in a more powerful position as a parent. Remember through all of this that you are the parent. We just talked about enjoying your child. I'm not saying that you should switch your role and quit being their parent and just start being their buddy. Be friendly, but remain the parent.
Be the parent, right.
Be the parent. Be willing to set the limits. And sometimes you're going to get feedback that says, oh, I hate you, or you hate me, or whatever, right? Usually, if we were to interpret that, it means, oh, I don't like the limit you just set.
And you're probably on the right track.
You're probably on the right track. So be ready to hear some of that, and it might sting a little bit, but you stay the parent. You gotta maintain that role. Now, we're gonna make some mistakes occasionally.
Right. And that's one of my other favorite techniques of parenting teenagers in particular, and that is the do-over.
Oh, love this one.
A lot of the times, we've talked so often that you need to parent from a place that's non-emotional in so many ways.
Right.
But our teens bring out emotions in us. So sometimes
They get
you
triggered.
respond just really quickly and it's very emotional. And you might have said something differently had you been calm. I remember this really strongly. One time a teenager's son came to me, said something, and I just kind of lit into him, and it just turned into a huge blow up, and he ran off, and I was mad while I was doing the chore I was doing. And I got to thinking, man, if I would have said this, I think things would have gone a whole lot better. So after I'd calmed down, given him a little time, I went down, I said, hey, I would really like a do-over. When you said this to me, I wish this is the way I would have handled it. I think it's really powerful. Now, that doesn't always change everything that happened, but there's a couple things that happen. One, you show the child, the teenager, that you make mistakes, that sometimes your emotions get the better of you.
Yeah.
And to take responsibility for that. The other thing, too, is you get in a habit of responding. You know how it is. You get in the habit of just the same response. If you don't practice a different response, it's probably not going to change. So the do-over actually gives you an opportunity to practice a new response, an improved response.
Vicki, I got to observe that very incident from the other room. And so I heard that unfolding, and it was so powerful. And I remember as you approached our son and said, hey, can I have a do-over? Mm-hmm. His response to you was so beautiful. He just melted. It was like your humility, your willingness to say, hey, you know what? That didn't go how I wanted it to. Can I have a do-over? It put him in a position of, oh. He's totally willing to work with you.
Yeah, he was.
And I'm not saying that's the magic.
They won't always.
But you might get some resistance, but it puts you in a position that is much more powerful as a parent.
Right. And I think it also illustrates something that I think we should bring up. A lot of the times, all we ever want to talk about is everybody's wins. And I think with teens, it's important to acknowledge from an early age, I'd say before they're teens, talk about what didn't go right today. And
right.
Yeah, because
what were the failures?
Yeah, and remember that I like the definition of fail as first attempt in learning.
Yeah.
You know, they're learning how to be an adult. That's why this teenage year is so important. Mm-hmm. And so give them a chance to talk about things that didn't go so great. And maybe you have to be the model of that. You know, this didn't go so great. This is how I wish it would have gone. Because we want to teach them how to problem solve and take responsibility for their actions, both the good and the bad, and turn it around to have a better outcome.
We already have high expectations. So notice that, and it's not good or bad, it's just kind of how we operate. That creates a lot of pressure for our teens.
Right.
And they want to please us. I think what you're talking about here, Vicki, is so powerful because we create a culture where failure or having a first attempt in learning is not only acceptable, it's expected, and it's a good thing.
And it's part of the journey.
You know, a great example of this, Disney's Meet the Robinsons. You remember that movie?
Uh-huh.
There's several times in the movie where they celebrate the failure. And a comment that went something like, oh yeah, you can learn a lot from your failures.
Success, not so much.
Right. And that is so true. Think about your own life. That is true. You can create a culture with your teen where it's very tolerant and accepting and affirming when it comes to those failures.
Another technique that I think is really important, especially for our teens, is to be there at the crossroads. And that means be there when they're coming and when they're going. And this can be really hard because I don't know about you, but it seems like the teenager is always ready to talk at midnight or 11 when I want to go to bed because I got to get up at 6.
Their brain turns on when ours turns
and
off.
you got to be there at the crossroads. So if there's any way you can be there as they leave in the morning, be there as they come home, or when they go on a date or come in. I have a friend, she's gotten into the habit that every time her kids come, when they go to leave, she goes out on the porch and she stands there until they leave and she waits. And I thought, I kind of want to try that. I've tried it a couple of times just in the last month or two, but I kind of like that, just being there for your kids. But I think it's important to try to be there in their crossroads, whatever their crossroads are.
Now, we all have different circumstances, and I know a lot of you are working,
and I do
and
too.
you've got heavy responsibilities, and it's hard to sometimes arrange all of the logistics for that. And that's why I think, like you said with this mom who wanted to do it this way, you find your way. What is it that represents to you that you're there, you're present, you're observing their life, you're participating, you're their cheerleader,
Right.
and you're there at the crossroads, as you said. It helps, right, to get more specific. Teenagers are different from kids. We've got a lot more resources for.
Also, when you're raising teenagers, you need to make sure that your communication with them is effective and healthy. A key to a healthy relationship with your teen is keeping the lines of communication open. They feel comfortable coming to you with issues, and that you're not lashing out on them if you're upset. However, finding ways to communicate with them can be a challenge when they seem to have little or no interest in us or maintaining a relationship with us, and that they seem so absorbed in their own lives with their peers. Remember, though, that teens really do want their parents involved in their lives, but they want it on their terms.
Teenagers, who haven't? Well, I did, 3 of them. So I've experienced how the sweetness of "I love you, Daddy" can turn into the bitterness of "I hate you, Dad," less than a decade later. But it's nothing new. In Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, a shepherd complains that a couple of teenagers have frightened his sheep away. He says, "I were there were no age between 10 and 3 and 20, or that youth would sleep out the rest, for there is nothing in the between but getting wenches with child, wronging the ancientry, stealing, fighting." And we can go back even further than 400 years. Listen to this. "Children now have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect to their elders. They contradict their parents. They gobble up dainties from the table. They cross their legs. And they tantalize their teachers." Now that is Socrates over 2,000 years ago. But to my generation, the archetypal teenager has to be that of Kevin. Harry Enfield's wonderful creation, who took the best part of a day to clean his father's car, and whose idea of tidying his bedroom was kicking the dirty clothes under the bed. But it all passes, doesn't it? Mine are all fine now. It's just a phase, isn't it? Maybe. But at the turn of the last century and following it, a lot has gone on in the area of brain science, which informs us about teenagers and what goes on up here. a lot of behaviours can now be explained, and scientists are still very much learning. Today, I want to share 3 aspects of this neuroscience with you and finish with a suggestion to parents like myself and to teachers like you. The first of these concerns the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, this part at the front of the brain that's like our decision-making centre. I like Robert Winston's description of it. He describes its role as the part of the brain that stops us stealing a chip from somebody's plate as we walk through a restaurant, despite the fact that we're feeling hungry. Now, in the actual TV episode where Kevin morphed into a teenager, his father observed, "He's losing the power of rational thought." Now, Harry Enfield probably didn't realise just how close to the truth he was. I'm going to tell you the story of Phineas Gage, railway worker. Now, back in the 1840s, when the US was extending its communication routes westward, this 20-something young man's job was to place explosives to blast through mountains. Now, in order to do this, he put dynamite into a drilled hole, had an assistant come along and cover it with sand, and then compress the sand into the hole to ensure a confined blast. And in order to do this, he used something called a tamping iron, okay? About 4 foot high, about 1 inch in diameter, sharp at the end he held it, flat at the other end, in order to compress it into the hole, the sand. Now, one September afternoon, his assistant forgot to place the sand in the hole, a mistake that Phineas needed like a hole in the head. Because what happened was, the tamping iron blew back, entered his left cheek, and exited his head out of the top, taking a piece of skull and quite a bit of brain matter with it. Phineas was blown back, and the tamping iron flew javelin-like and landed about 20 metres behind him. But Phineas got up, walked to a nearby cart after speaking rationally to his men, and then got driven home, where he waited about half an hour until a doctor came and patched him up. Now, he recovered enough to exhibit himself and his tamping iron all around the country, including at P.T. Barnum's New York Museum. And then he started looking after horses. He moved down to Chile, where he worked in the livery stables. And eventually he died in California some 11 years later. But in the interim, his personality changed from a likeable young man to somebody who was untrustworthy and had fits of temper when he didn't get his own way. Sound familiar? Our understanding of the human brain, and particularly of the PFC, came on leaps and bounds. That we could lose a substantial amount of brain matter and continue to be a walking, talking human being became apparent. And that this frontal section of the brain is responsible for character and personality also became apparent. And this was no more horrifically illustrated than in the middle of the last century, when some scientists used this knowledge to deliberately disable the frontal lobes in order to cure mental illness. In the US alone, between 1936 and 1978, some 35,000 lobotomies were conducted. Thankfully, we don't do that anymore. What we do have is MRI scanning. Now, when it was first invented back in the 70s, a scan would take several hours. Now they take several minutes. And a chap called Jay Geed set the neuroscientific ball rolling when he conducted a study using MRI scanners with children. He discovered, against all knowledge, that around the time of puberty we get an extra set of neurons. This completely wasn't understood until he discovered this. Now, what then happens is, through a process called myelination, pathways that are used are reinforced, a bit like lagging pipes. Okay? Now, JP calls this the use it or lose it stage. So, myelination starts at the back of the brain and works its way forward. So the last area to mature is this, our PFC, the decision-making centre, which is why you are as well asking your teenager why they left the gas hob on as asking your puppy why it messed on the carpet. Teenagers are bad at making decisions, and now we know why. The second aspect introduces us to another scientist, Deborah Jurgel Todd. Now, she conducted an experiment using MRI scanners. She put adults and teenagers into them and showed them pictures in order to see which parts of their brains they used to interpret what they saw. Here's one of the pictures. Now, all adults shown this picture interpreted it as fear. Half the teenagers who saw it interpreted it as sadness, shock, confusion, or anger. Why? Well, what Jurgel and Todd discovered was that adults used the prefrontal cortex to interpret what they saw, whereas teenagers used their amygdalas, obviously avoiding using the PFC because it's still a work in progress. But what's the amygdala for? Mostly for providing emotional rather than rational responses. So, not only are teenagers avoiding making decisions, when they do make them, they're often using the wrong parts of their brains. The third aspect of this that I want to share with you involves the cerebellum. Now, although it's at the back of the brain, it too doesn't mature until our early 20s because it continues to grow during the teenage years. JP links the cerebellum to what he calls higher thought, maths, music, philosophy. So it's entirely possible that taking part in sport, or maybe even just running around, can stimulate learning at this higher level. It's interesting to hear this link between physical activity and learning, something many of us have felt intuitively to be true. And Socrates was right to complain that children were chattering rather than exercising. So what can we do with all this knowledge? Firstly, I'd suggest, don't ask teenagers questions that begin with the word why. Rather, get them to recount their behaviour to you. Get them to tell you what they did. You'll arrive at the same place in the end, but perhaps without challenging what may have appeared as an irrational action. Secondly, avoid questions that contain more than one concept in them. There's enough going on in the teenage brain already without adding more confusion to it. Remember, the teen brain, when faced with something new, will often offer an emotional rather than a rational response. Keeping things simple reduces the likelihood of the teenager defaulting into fight or flight mode. And in terms of reinforcing the pathways, the advice would be to give rests. Allow the teen brain time to take in and retain. So here's the thing. I promised a suggestion, and it's this. Why don't we tell them? Why don't we share some of this knowledge to give them maybe some understanding and maybe even control of their own development? There's a lot talked these days about motivation and its impact on learning. And obviously, motivation is now known to be closely linked to identity. A greater openness to understanding ourselves leads to a greater openness to improving ourselves. Maybe, if we gave them a little bit more information about what was going on, it could help them. it certainly couldn't hurt. Thank you.
Communicating well with your team is about establishing trust and a foundation for mutual respect. Let's look at some scenarios that show both the wrong and right way to communicate with your team.
Really? We're an hour late. Now the post office is closed.
I just forgot, okay?
You're so irresponsible. What's wrong with you?
I just forgot, okay?
You're grounded.
You're so unfair.
The father was worried and scared that something had happened to his son. That fear and anger was directed toward his teen in an unproductive way. It's okay to be upset in this situation, but dumping those feelings on his son won't help him from being late in the future. For a more productive conversation, frame the exchange with I statements that explain reasoning and fosters a two-way communication.
Hey, son.
Hey,
I was worried about you. We agreed that you'd be home an hour ago since I needed to use the car. When I didn't hear from you, I thought something bad might have happened.
sorry, I was at Sean's house. We were all hanging out, and I didn't realize that it was so late until I got in the car to come home until the time.
Listen, I'm glad you're okay. But why didn't you call when you saw what time it was?
I don't know. I guess that I knew I messed up.
Yeah. It's human to lose track of time, especially when you're having fun. Mistakes happen, but part of growing up is keeping your agreements. I need to know that if we agree on driving privileges and a time that you have to be home, you're going to stick to it. You get that, right? So, since you were late, your weekday curfew is going to be 6 o'clock for the next month.
Really? A whole month?
If you can show that you can come home on time, we can talk about moving it back to 7 o'clock. Agreed?
Agreed.
Look, it's really important that you don't hide your mistakes from me. And hey, I don't expect you to be perfect, but I can't help you if you don't communicate with me. Owning up to your mistakes shows that you're responsible, but hiding them, trying to avoid the consequences, that shows me you're not being responsible. Make sense?
I get it.
Hey, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Actually, yeah.
The father used I statements to draw his son's attention to the fact that there are consequences for his actions, and this opened the door for his son to share his other concerns.
Everyone else gets to stay out later. How come my curfew's only 7?
Okay, some of your friends may stay out later than you do, and others probably come home earlier. 7 o'clock on a weeknight works well because you usually have homework to do, and you have to get up really early for school. If you get in late, then you're up even later doing homework. It's hard for you to get up in the morning, and then you're all cranky.
Dad, really? You make it sound like I'm a baby. All cranky.
I'm sorry, cranky was a poor choice of words. I shouldn't have said that. What I'm trying to say is that we all need enough sleep to stay healthy. The curfew is only there to keep you safe and healthy, not to control your personal life. If there's a specific event that you want to stay out later for, we can discuss that on a case-by-case basis. That's why your weekday curfew is 7 o'clock.
The father communicated to his son that rules are in place for safety and not control. House rules work best when teens understand why the rules are in place, not just that rules exist and they must comply with them. The father did call his son cranky, which wasn't the best choice of words, and his son took offense. The father recovered by acknowledging his mistake and also modeled taking responsibility for his actions. Here's another example.
See you later.
Where are you going?
I'm going to the mall with Michael.
Didn't Michael just get his license? No way, you are not going anywhere.
I have no life.
Help your teen understand that the rules are in place for safety and not control.
See you later!
Where are you going?
I'm going to the mall with Michael.
Come here, please. I didn't know Michael got his license. When did he take his test at the DMV?
A few weeks ago. Gotta go, he's waiting.
Hold on a second. I thought we had agreed that you wouldn't ride with a newly licensed driver. Remember, it's the law in our state. I'd be worried you'd get into an accident with an inexperienced driver.
Mom, he's really smart, and I know he is a good driver.
I'm sure he will be, once he gets a little more experience. Until then, no riding with him. The state has laws like this for a reason. It's unsafe. I need to make sure that our family follows the law, and so do you. If you get into that car, that means your friend is breaking the law. He could get into a lot of trouble, and you both could get hurt. How about I drive you both to the mall?
No way, Mom. That's too embarrassing. But look, I'll talk to him. Maybe we can just hang out here, okay?
That sounds like a good idea. And later tonight, I'd like for us to talk some more about this. I need to know that you're going to follow the law and rules all of the time, even when I'm not around. I need to know that I can trust you, honey.
Yeah, I know.
These are just some examples based on decades of research to help you think about how parents may sound to teens. Your family may look and interact differently than what was displayed in the video. Take the guidance from the scenarios and make them your own. No one knows your children and family better than you do.
Here are some things that teens have reported that they wish that their parents would talk to them about. Family issues, emotional issues, and having the parents display affection and tell them that they love them. Big philosophical issues, what they think about religion and politics, and war and why countries fight or disagree. Their own futures, especially college and beyond for teenagers who are trying to plan their futures, their personal interest, their own lives, and current events. Here are just some examples of conversation starters. I'm not going to read them all, but like asking them what the high point or low part of their day was, like that video in the front part of this, where he said, ask them about what their failures were today, what didn't go right, what's on their mind, what they're thinking or feeling, what happened today that they didn't expect, did they learn anything new? Just open-ended questions that they can respond in depth to if they desire a conversation. Here are some things that teenagers need to hear. You can say these things in ways that are comfortable for you. Find your own voice. It is the underlying message that matters, not the actual words used. Like telling them that you love them unconditionally and always will. That they belong to the family and they are important. That you are there for them regardless of what mistakes they make. That you will be there for them when they make mistakes in judgment and when they're impulsive. And that you understand that right now is a hard time to focus on others because there's so much going on for them. That things won't always be this way. And that you were a teenager once. That learning and mistakes and the things that they're experiencing can be a part of growing up, and that you appreciate all the good things about them or the things that they do and their potential, and that you know that sometimes that they don't like the rules, but why they're there, that they're there to keep them safe and help them grow up and mature, and thank them for their efforts. And the things that they do. You can also let them know that it's okay for them to act like a kid sometimes, and let go and have some fun. and that you're not out to ruin their life, even though sometimes it might seem like you are. We talk about helping them problem solve a lot. So just to reiterate with teens, whenever teens can be included in the process of exploring a problem and participating in generating solutions to that problem, they are much more likely to cooperate, comply, and accept the consequences. A problem exploration or conflict resolution process also gives you a way to include your teen in finding ways to handle conflicts or problems and differences that may arise within family or other venues. The process needs to be both respectful and provide emotional safety for each person who is involved in the process, and it must be constructive for each person as well. You can use this approach to model healthy ways to address problems and conflicts. Often the decision about how to resolve the problem is not as important as the process itself. If you have any questions about problem solving, please refer to the other PowerPoints and instruction videos where we dive deeper into that. The goals of helping teens problem solve are to build and maintain a healthy relationship, to encourage the child's budding sense of autonomy, which is like, it's like another word for independence, like doing things on their own. Also it helps build the teen's sense of competency, so things that they know how to do. It encourages teens to be more involved and more responsible, maintain an atmosphere of respect, to role model fair and effective ways to handle problems and conflicts. And the steps include describing the problem without blaming or shaming them, explaining why it's a problem, and then each person explains their perspective, needs, or feelings about that problem. And then you brainstorm possible ways to solve or manage the problem, choosing a solution to try out of the ones that you've brainstormed, and then developing possible consequences of those solutions, checking to see how everybody is feeling about the fairness of the process, and then checking back after an established period of time to evaluate the effectiveness of the solution. We talk about those last two in family meetings where you're talking to them about solutions to problems as well. This is an audio attention verification question. Each section has, each lesson has audio and visual content or questions that you will be writing down, creating a document, writing the questions, and then your responses to them to either type into a forum in Google Classrooms or to submit a document in Google Classrooms to verify that you are paying attention to the content and not being distracted. So the first question is, how can being partners with your teen and having good and healthy communication help with problem solving? Puberty versus adolescence. So when does it start? Everybody's different. There are early bloomers, late arrivers, speedy developers, and slow but steady growers. But it's important to make a somewhat artificial distinction between puberty and adolescence. Puberty is the physical changes that are happening, and adolescence is more of an attitude change or a personality change. Most of us think of puberty as the development of sexual characteristics. These are certainly the most visible signs of puberty and impending adulthood, but also kids who are showing signs of physical changes between 8 and 14 or so are also going through puberty, and also can be going through a bunch of changes that aren't readily being seen from the outside. So changes that aren't visible are changes of adolescence. These many kids announce the onset of adolescence with a dramatic change in behavior around their parents, and kids often start trying on different looks or identities, and they become very aware of how they differ from their peers and others, and which which can result in episodes of distress and conflict with parents. But it's important to let your child develop their sense of identity without squashing it too much. Of course, you want to make sure they're not doing anything outrageous, like, I don't know, getting tattoos at 13, or dyeing your hair like a really crazy color. Actually, that's more acceptable now than it was when I was a kid. My grandma would have told me no in a heartbeat.
Most schools now actually have like dress codes, like you can't dye it like crazy colors. Because it can be distracting to other students.
I did not know that. Parenting teenagers is just like parenting toddlers. They have intense tantrums. They are going through intense development. They have issues with friends. They engage in risky behaviors. They think they are the center of the universe. They need lots of sleep, and they need their parents. So on intense development, while development continues through the lifespan, so from birth till death, or conception to death, there are huge leaps in physical, cognitive, emotional, and neurological development during toddlerhood and the teen years. Even though we are in shock at how big they are getting at both age groups, we need to remember that during these phases, our children are experiencing critical developments that, while inconvenient, are a necessary component in growing up into a healthy and happy adult. Tantrums. Toddlers and teens are both capable of remarkable tantrums. They tend to be highly emotional beings in both scenarios, as teenagers and toddlers. This high emotionality is related to the neurological or brain development, and teens get the added bonus of significant hormonal development. Dealing with a teenage tantrum is often harder because we expect much greater maturity from them because of their age. But in both cases, toddlers and teens are undergoing significant brain changes that are affecting the way they see the world and process emotions. Patience is almost impossible for parents and caregivers, but it is really a virtue in these situations. They have issues with their friends. Both toddlers and teens have significant and social developments at these critical phases in their life. For toddlers, the issues generally revolve around sharing, cooperation, and being in other people's personal space. But for teens, the issues are still social, but they're in different, in important ways. While both age groups are egocentric, which means they tend to think that the world revolves around them, that their needs should be satisfied. Teens are not only egocentric, but they're also preoccupied with what other people think about them. Teens do something else that toddlers can't do, which is taking perspective from other people's points of view, and they start seeing and incorporating those points of view into the way they relate to others, the decisions that they make about their own actions, and their relationships with others. Additionally, teens begin learning new skills around for negotiation, planning, and working in groups. They also engage in risky behaviors. This goes a lot with brain development. Those centers of their brain that regulate emotions, impulse control, consequence, assessments, and stuff like that. So the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for problem solving, weighing options, being strategic, and planning, is under construction. It's closed for remodeling, basically. While also the limbic system, which is responsible for emotional regulation and impulse control, is developing and closed for construction. So, with limited impulse control, high emotional reactivity, and low capacity for planning ahead and assessing their risks, teens think they're immortal and invulnerable, nothing's bad's going to happen to them, so they engage in more risky behaviors than they probably should. They also think they're the center of the universe. That's where that egocentrism comes in. It usually starts about age 11, where they become highly aware of their own thought processes, and then they start thinking about their own thinking, and then when they are thinking, they're primarily thinking about themselves, and this is the beginning of their identity formation. They also need sleep. Toddlers need between 10 to 12 hours per night, but usually closer to 12 hours. But teens need 9 to 10 hours per night, but unfortunately there are loads of things that interrupt this and put teens into sleep debt, such as their friends, social media, school projects, homework, extracurricular activities, if they have a job, angst and hormones. They all can get in the way of a good night's sleep, and they all impact whether or not our adolescent or teenager is going to be friendly. Importantly, sleep not only impacts how social and helpful our teens are around the house, it also affects learning and academic success, and some studies even suggest that it has an impact on the brain development and organization. I'm going to let Leslie talk about teen circadian rhythms.
Okay, so the circadian rhythm is basically just the way that our body naturally works with like awake and sleep hours. So teenagers, you might give them bedtime at 9 o'clock, but they're staying up till 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, their body is naturally wired that way. Teenagers naturally go to sleep later and wake up later because of the way their body's developing. So understanding that and not going crazy because your teen's not going to bed when you want them to, and understanding why it's harder for them to get up in the mornings is important. Our school system doesn't really account for that because it just doesn't. These are all new things that we've learned. But another important piece about sleep is it also affects mental health. So if they have other issues that they've been dealing with, when their sleep patterns change, that's also going to affect the way that they are dealing and coping with their mental health issues.
Parenting toddlers or teens, they also need their parents. We readily accept that toddlers need their parents because they're heavily dependent on us. But teens, on the other hand, they're like hardwired to show us how much they don't need us. They want absolute independence and freedom, and they seem intent on resisting our efforts to connect with them, guide them, and help them, and even try to push us away when we get too close. But the truth is that every child and teen needs their parents or caregivers regardless of how old that child gets. Our adolescents must forge an identity and must be separate from us to be psychologically healthy and independent. But that same teenager will thrive when independence is achieved and there is still a strong connection with their caregivers who love, nurture, support, and guide them.
So I heard a really cool analogy on the radio yesterday, and it says that like when you're going from raising a child to a teenager, you're going from being the caretaker to kind of the coach. Mm-hmm. And it's changing, and the only thing that's changing is the way you relate and how much you're not involved, because the coach is very involved, but how much you're controlling that involvement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Teens also need that praise. They need boundaries and attention just like the little guys do. So our brains develop until about age 25, which is why that's like our personalities develop until age 25. Smoking and drinking are now illegal until at least 21. But while our brains are developing, especially as teenagers where all those systems are being renovated, there's going to be mood swings, there's going to be issues with impulse control. They're going to have huge egos, engage in risky behavior, try to gain a sense of independence, and they will crave structure, but they will fight it every step of the way. They'll be big button pushers and maybe say things just because they know they will be hurtful to you. And they most of all need sleep because it helps that brain development.
The teenage brain is a late childhood brain. It's not yet a fully mature adult brain. So they are at the end of a childhood pattern of brain physiology, and they're emerging the adult pattern. So they're sort of at the crossroads of these 2 points in development. And as you know, children can learn very quickly. They go through what we call a critical period of synaptic plasticity, where early in childhood, children can learn 2 and 3 languages flawlessly, whereas adults struggle to learn a second language with even getting a mild accent under control. So the teenager is still at that peak learning. They're coming down to adult levels, but they're still more able to pick things up and memorize and imprint on things than perhaps later in life. Now, the thing is, though, they also haven't acquired a really important feature of the adult brain, which is how the different brain areas really connect to each other. So as we get older, we develop better, stronger connections between our different regions of the brain. And it actually develops from sort of the back of your brain to the front, the connectivity of the brain. And, big surprise, the last place to develop to connect is the frontal lobe. So this process is called myelination, which is actually a wrapping of the connections to make them conduct signal faster, so that you connect up parts of your brain faster. It's probably how adults compensate for not having the brilliant learning that children have. So the last place to connect is the frontal lobe. Now we know that the frontal lobe has some very special properties. It's what controls insight, judgment, blocks you from too much risk-taking behavior, and these are all issues with the teenager brain. So teenagers are notorious for risk-taking, poor judgment, not really thinking through things properly, yet they can be very sharp at the same time and be memorizing all sorts of things for the SATs and all these standardized tests and be whizzing through material, yet they're not showing the judgment. And so that's the paradox, that they are very, very sharp on the one hand with respect to their ability to learn and the physiology that underlies learning, but the connectivity is lagging. They're not there yet. So you have very bright people who may not actually be ready for prime time in terms of their judgment and insight.
Some common teen behavioral problems are fighting with their siblings, not listening, being disrespectful, arguing, breaking curfew, talking back, being uncooperative, directly disobeying, leaving messes around the house, procrastinating and not doing their homework. Some other normal ones include the experimentation of sex, possibly sexual orientation, alcohol and drugs, experiencing some aggression, lying or hiding facts. My grandma used to call it lying by omission. Defying rules, drastic changes in their appearance, decreased communication, spending more time with their friends, being indecisive. When those things happen, it's good to have a trusting relationship, to empathize with them, respect them, offer help and show them that you care. Another normal behavior for teenagers is oftentimes even abandoning commitments. Some withdraw or isolation, not too much. Shifts in their attitude, impulsivity, academic issues. but it's important to make sure that none of those things are happening at a rate or frequency that's abnormal, because it could be a sign of possibly mental health issues or addictions, whether it's sex, drugs, or alcohol. So really being aware and taking things to professionals is never going to hurt if you need outside advice.
And be mindful that there's certain disorders that don't start until later ages. So don't just assume that they're making things up or lying or things like that.
A lot of times the teenagers I work with at the hospital are always letting us know my parents don't listen, my parents lecture me too much, my parents are too intrusive. And a lot of times parents struggle to effectively listen to their teenagers, though I have a lot of parents who will come to me and say, oh, my child doesn't communicate with me. And I'll point out to them, well, this is why, this is what they're telling us as to why not. A lot of it's just getting parents to understand that their teenagers aren't necessarily doing things just to do things, but they do things because it's a learned behavior, that the way they were raised influences the decisions that they make, the behaviors that they have. The tips that I would always give to families, and certainly in the therapies that I do, the things I hear the most common is when they're talking to their teens and the teens are, giving the parent feedback, not to get stuck on just the words, but what's the meaning behind the words, what's the teenager trying to say that maybe not effectively saying it. I also tell parents, I give them this unofficial rule of what I call 3 to 5 in terms of their feedback. If they're going to talk to their child or their teen, try to say whatever they're going to say within 3 to 5 sentences. I find that the teenagers always say, I'm always getting lectured, so if they keep it limited, then the teenager is more likely to open up. Another tip that I give to parents a lot of times is to be very consistent in their limit setting, in their parenting style. Don't make it so inconsistent because the teenagers will try to play with that inconsistency and try to get away with the rules. I also tell parents that when you're talking to their teenagers, respect their opinion, respect what they're saying, even if the parent strongly disagrees with it. I also try to get parents to understand that if they've said something 5 times, they can keep another 5, 50, 25 times is not going to make a difference. They started to lecture. So I'll say to parents, it's a rule of research, that when you find 3 resources that say the same things, you're done with the research. When you've said something to a teenager, they already understand it, and when you say it again and again and again, you're turning the teenagers off. I then also try to get the teenagers to understand that their parents are trying their best, that their parents are also learning.
So keeping an eye out on those frequencies and levels of severity is important to distinguish between normal teenage behavior and mental health issues. Some rebellious, irritable, anxious behavior is a normal part or an healthy part of being a teenager. However, when it shifts from being a teenager's shifts in a teenager's personality are more extreme, they may be indicators of a mental health issue. Concerning behaviors can sometimes be prevented when parents talk to teens frequently and have open, supportive dialogue and communication. And experts say that even if parents aren't sure whether or not a change in their teens' behavior is something they should be worried about, it doesn't hurt to check with a therapist, a pediatrician, or even a school counselor. Some areas to watch would be sleep, moodiness and irritability, grades, defiance or rebellion, substance use and experimentation, and lying or withholding information.
Hello
Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Karen Zingle, and I'm here today with Dr. Gillian Adams, family medicine physician at MedStar Medical Group in Alexandria. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited for this Facebook Live chat. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm really excited to be here.
Good. Well, welcome to MedStar.
Thanks.
So we are kicking off Mental Health Awareness Month in May. So today we're going to be talking about adolescent behavioral and mental health disorders. So before we get started, Dr. Adams, can you just tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I'm a family doctor. A lot of people don't know what a family doctor is. It means I did a residency in family medicine. I treat all ages. I see newborns, I go to nursing homes, and I do everything in between. So I'm someone that can follow patients throughout their lives. And I do have a kind of special interest in treating mental health disorders. I've been very interested ever since my residency in treating depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD. And I am very, I have a certain expertise in it. I give talks to other doctors about how to treat this in primary care, and also I've given talks on the national level at different conferences.
Thank you. That's very impressive. Yeah, we're so excited to have you here. So let's get started with some questions. We're going to focus right now on adolescent behavioral and mental health disorders.
Okay.
So as we know, today adolescents face many more challenges than ever before, starting with regular social pressures that have always existed, and now we're adding technology into the mix, like social media. Adolescents are exposed to more, and parents are oftentimes unaware of the social pressures, and technology seems, to exacerbate that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the warning signs. What are the warning signs that parents should look for in their adolescence? Signs of depression or anxiety or stress?
So adolescent angst is very difficult to differentiate from depression or anxiety. Sometimes when your teenager comes home and seems sad or seems kind of unhappy with their social situation or wants to complain, seems a bit irritable, you may think, oh, they're depressed. But actually, it's normal. Adolescence is a very pivotal time. It's where kids are, or people are developing insight into themselves, the ability to make choices on their own, the ability to kind of orchestrate their own lives, and it's a time of great learning. Even when I have had times in my practice where I wasn't seeing new patients, I would always see adolescents because I thought it was such an important time for them to have someone that they could confide in and be able to figure out who they are. So the classic symptoms and signs of depression are the same for childhood, adolescents, and adults, which are trouble sleeping, either falling asleep or staying asleep, not being interested in things that you're usually interested in. I used to love to play softball, and now I don't. The two cardinal symptoms are either feeling very sad or very anxious most of the time, which in adolescence often is manifested as irritability. And all adolescents are irritable, but this is all the time. And then they can be negative, but this is more, every day is more negative. And what happened to my kid? They used to love to play softball, used to be on the debate team, and now really doesn't want to do that. Feeling guilty or self-doubts. I'm stupid. I'm just not as good as the other kids. Having no energy. And so this is a classic one where people complain about their adolescents, oh, they go to bed late and then they wake up late, but they have normal energy for other times of the day, as opposed to with depression where they're tired all the time. I'll have teenagers who don't want to get out of bed the whole weekend, or they used to love to go for a sleepover with good friends, and now they really could care less. And then, of course, some risk-taking behavior. I always say that our main job in life is to help our children love themselves. If you feel good inside yourself, you're less likely to try drugs, to have sex because you want to be liked or popular. If you feel good, then you tend to not engage in as much risk-taking behavior. So there's some. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Awesome.
You talked a lot about the differences between normal stresses and cause for concern. At what point should a parent contact a physician for additional support?
Well, I think it's important to look at how your child is functioning normally in his or her life. If grades are good, a lot of parents say, oh, well, the grades are fine, so I really don't have anything to worry about. But if your kid just doesn't seem like, let's say herself, if they're not, the kid that I knew before, or also not acting like a lot of peers their age in terms of just kind of normal, healthy function, then you want to buy the physician. So as a family doctor on Central Dispatch, you bring your problem to me, and I can help you negotiate the path and which way you want to go. Do you need to see, if it's a child, do you need to see a therapist? Or maybe we should just work on exercise and sleep and healthy habits. But I think if you look at what is a normal function, or are there barriers to my adolescent leading a meaningful life? Are there things that they want to do or they used to like to do that they're not doing anymore? Then you want to seek some help and just talk about it. When you go to the doctor, it doesn't mean you're going to be slammed on a medicine or sent into intensive psychotherapy. Those may be useful, but it's more just to talk and see what could help at this point in time help them feel well going through this year.
Right. Great.
Oh, I wanted to say something about social media. So there's a lot of controversy in parents about when do you get your kid a cell phone, and is it even a good idea? And I do want to put a plug in for making a contract with your child when you get them a cell phone about the appropriate use, setting appropriate limits with use. It's recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics and Family Practice to not have more than 1 to 2 hours of screen time, any screen, iPad, iPhone, computer, TV a day. And also there's no screen time at night. When initially you get a phone for your child, whether it's at age, there's kind of a consensus that when your child is going to be without you, there are times where they need to contact you for safety reasons, that's a good time. But you see a lot of kids 7 and 8 with cell phones. They should put those phones in the kitchen or in a safe place at night, no screen time at night, and the parents should have access. You don't get privacy with social media at age 8. and so like I said, you can Google, and I know I have resources of good contracts you make with your child. Social media can create more anxiety and depression than not. When I was a child and I was friends with two girls, and they went to the mall without me, I didn't know. Now, I meet Julie at the mall and we're having such a good time. And I think, as a child, oh, they're leaving me out. Oh, this is awful. Why didn't they call me? And so actually, like Facebook, social media, Instagram, Snapchat, can all make children and adults feel more isolated. So I think that's really, I want to bring that up.
No, thank you. That's really helpful. Very good. Let's talk a little bit more about fatigue. Okay. So, talking about normal fatigue versus causing for concern. Are we talking about an adolescent child who's sleeping in until 2 in the afternoon? Does that cause for concern? Is that normal behavior?
So your sleep-wake cycle changes as you get older, and you know that young children often get up really early and go to bed really early. But around puberty, it changes, and they want to go to sleep later and wake up later, which totally doesn't work for high school, but it's just the way it is. Actually, there have been studies where they started high school later, as opposed to like the 7 o'clock, more 9, and kids performed better on standardized tests, and there was less absenteeism and less fighting in school. So it's normal for your child to want to go to bed later and wake up later. It's not normal to sleep all day and not want to do things, and also to be always tired. There's a concept called emotional exhaustion. When you get enough sleep and you are trying to get some exercise and you're making it through school, yet you always feel tired. It's true for us too. When I have patients who come in who have anxiety or depression, and they say, I'm always tired. I can get 8 hours of sleep and I'm getting my exercise, but every day I just think, when can I get back in bed? So that's the kind of exhaustion or fatigue you have with depression and anxiety. You never feel completely well rested. Also, with both depression and anxiety, one of the cardinal symptoms is having trouble either falling asleep or staying asleep, so taking too long to fall asleep, or if you wake up not being able to get back to sleep for a half hour, an hour, and of course that makes you feel tired during the day, so that's another reason that people with depression often have fatigue.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, let's shift to ADHD. So we hear so much about ADHD or attention deficit disorder. What are the early warning signs of ADHD?
Well, warning signs is an interesting question. So ADD, ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and attention deficit disorder are hardwired. It's not, they don't come from something. It's the way you're wired. They often runs in the family. And it's 5 to 9% of the population of kids and adolescents, and 4% of the population of adults. And that, it does last into adulthood, but often the ADHD goes away, the hyperactivity, the fidgetiness, and the distraction persists. So adults are less likely to be, jumping up and down and climbing on the furniture, but they will say, I can't attend to things, I get very distracted when I'm in a meeting, etc. So I know there's a big concern about people wanting to medicate kids just to make them be good in the classroom. Right. But it's not, no teacher wants to, or I think very few teachers, if any, want to put children on medicine to control them. They want to have ADD, ADHD treated so that child can function well and can have good self-esteem. When you look at a class of 30 kids, maybe 4 or 5 are treated for ADD, ADHD. So what you look for are inability to sit still, not just being active. And it makes me a little crazy when people say, oh, I'm really energetic, I have ADD. You don't have ADD, you have energy. It's totally different. So often, inability to settle, inability to listen, not retaining information, forgetting what the homework was. It's not that they don't want to do homework. Kids love to get approval. They love to do well and get the gold star. If they're not, there's an impediment to that. Right. They are having trouble where they try and they're not remembering, and so they don't do well on things, and then they shut down and say, I'm just stupid. So it's trouble using things, forgetting things, inability to complete things, poor organization, unable to be redirected. If you have the little boy that's jumping up and down and you say, John, you better sit down, he's going to sit down and he's going to want to get that approval from his teacher unless he's physically incapable. And then he keeps getting up and running around. It's not because he's trying to antagonize her, it's because he can't do it. There's a really good book by Raimondo, is one of the last names. It's called You Mean I'm Not Lazy, Stupid, or Crazy? And so many parents bring kids in and say, he's just lazy, he doesn't want to work. And really, they're not lazy. Their kids are very approval driven. But if they can't do it, they tend to just shut down and not want to try. And that's our job, to see that and to say, how can I help you feel better about where you are and be successful?
At what age would you be diagnosed with ADHD?
So ADHD is generally diagnosed before age 7. But sometimes, especially in girls, who, she's getting good grades and she's so sweet, she's just in la-la land sometimes. Right. They miss it. But still, girls are going to have some of the same things as boys, which are, not, I forgot to turn in those papers, I forgot to do that. And unable to absorb what they're learning in a class. So generally, with the diagnosis of ADD, ADHD, you want the symptoms to have been there before age 7.
Okay, and how is it diagnosed? Is there...
it's multifactorial. So you want to talk to teachers who have been, so the symptoms, whereas with depression and anxiety, you need the symptoms to have been evident for at least 2 weeks. It's usually way longer than that. But in the past 2 weeks, have you felt down, more than okay, etc.? It needs to be at least 6 months with ADD, ADHD. And you can bring the teachers in, their parents' rating scales and their children's rating scales. We often do some neuropsychiatric testing because you want to make sure there's no learning disability, which makes it hard to read or do math. There's no sleep disorder. There's no metabolic disorder. Certainly in the past we saw a fair amount of lead poisoning and things like that, hypothyroid. But usually when you evaluate ADD, it's pretty rare that you find anything in the bloodworm, but you always check everything at the beginning. So you get parents, there's a rating scale, the Connors rating scale we've used for 30 years. So parents fill it out, teachers fill it out, and then when they're old enough, the kids fill them out, and then we use that to reassess each time.
Okay, great. And what about treatment options? What treatment options?
So with depression, anxiety, ADD, with children, you always start with behavior therapy or cognitive behavior therapy. It doesn't make any sense to just put a kid on medication. It's just not the way it's done. And they don't learn enough in terms of coping skills and how to identify how they're feeling. One thing I wanted to say before, with kids in depression, they say things instead of like, I'm feeling depressed, I'm not feeling at the top of my emotional game, when they're 6. Things like, I don't enjoy anything, I was restless all day, I'm no good, I cry a lot, I hate myself, I'm irritable all the time, I'm lonely. So that's how kids present with depression and anxiety. So you start out with a good therapist, and it's really important that your doctor knows good therapists to refer you to, if at all possible, and you should feel comfortable going to that person. But then we do have very good medications that work very well and will cause no long-term side effects. I think it's sad sometimes when people are incredibly anti-medication to the detriment of the child or adolescent being in control of their problems and not being able to be their true selves. If you're feeling sad, anxious, not sleeping, feeling bad about yourself, irritable, I've had kids, I hate everybody, they're all stupid, I hate school, and then we go through counseling, and then I put them on medicine and they come back and they like school and they're feeling better about themselves. The world is brighter and more open. And if you've tried all the other things, resetting those neurotransmitters, serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, so that the symptoms of depression, anxiety, and then ADD with other medicine goes away, the kids are now able to live a fulfilling life. Right. And another thing about medication is once you start, it doesn't mean you have to take it for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. This is a big fear. And when you, the first time someone's treated for depression, they should be treated for 1 year to remission, or at least 6 months, but 1 year is better, which means no signs or symptoms, like feeling normal for you. And then 50% of people will never need medicine again. ADD is different. ADHD is more common before the teenage years and then ADD after. Mm-hmm. And through exercise, sleep regulation, eating healthily, and behavioral therapy where you learn how to identify, okay, I need to do things the same time each day. Mm-hmm. I put my keys in the same place. Right. When I leave my class, I'm going to go through and look at my folder and do this. You learn how to schedule your life. Then a fair number of people won't need medicine. But if they're trying and they're like, I'm so frustrated, I'm trying everything, but I just can't reach my goals, I'm still, not remembering, then just to make their lives easier, clearer, medication can be extended as long as it is helpful.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful information. So let's talk a little bit about the coordinated care approach that you guys have here at Metzler Medical Group. Okay. What does that mean for patients and their families?
It doesn't apply to us because we don't live there. This is where I am going to end this session. We are going to do this in 3 parts for time, and because the first part of this has a lot of lengthy videos, and then the other parts will be smaller videos with more information. So next week we will, next session we will pick up on, do you enable your teen? Please continue on to part 2.